My family mocked my old phone, but I used it to record the truth that saved me. I still remember the first time my grandson pointed at my flip phone and laughed. A sound that should have been music to a grandmother's ears, but instead felt like tiny needles pricking my heart. "Grandma, is that from the Stone Age?" he'd asked, and the whole room erupted in laughter. I smiled then, the way I always did, because love doesn't demand defense. But that little silver phone, worn and scratched from years of loyal service, would become the witness to a truth so painful that even now, as I tell you this story, my hands tremble slightly at the memory. You see, my dear, sometimes the things we mock become the very instruments of our salvation, or someone else's downfall. Welcome, my dear. This is Grandma Alice Stories, where every tale carries a lesson and every wound carries wisdom. Pour yourself some tea, settle into your chair, and listen carefully, because what I'm about to share with you is a story about family, betrayal, and how the smallest, most overlooked things can hold the greatest power. Life has its own way of settling scores, you'll see. My name is Alice, and I've lived 73 years on this earth. Long enough to know that technology changes, but human nature rarely does. My flip phone was a gift from my late husband, Robert, before he passed 5 years ago. It wasn't fancy. It didn't have apps or a touchscreen or whatever else the young folks swear they can't live without these days. But it made calls, it took pictures, and most importantly, it held 17 voicemails from Robert that I couldn't bear to delete. His voice telling me he loved me, asking me to pick up milk, reminding me about our anniversary dinner. These small, ordinary moments that became priceless after he was gone. I lived alone in our modest 2-bedroom house on Maple Street, the same house where we raised our son, David. The mortgage was paid off years ago, and my needs were simple. I had my garden out back, my weekly card games with the other ladies from church, and every Sunday, I had dinner with David's family. That was my joy, watching my son, my daughter-in-law Jessica, and my 2 grandchildren, Emma and Noah, gathered around a table, laughing and sharing stories. But over the past year, something had changed. It started small, as poison often does. Comment here, a rolled eye there. Jessica would sigh dramatically whenever I pulled out my phone to take a picture of the grandchildren. "Alice, seriously, you need to upgrade. It's embarrassing," she'd say, her voice dripping with a condescension I tried to ignore. David would chuckle nervously, caught between his wife and his mother, always choosing the path of least resistance, which meant rarely defending me. "Mom, Jess is right," he'd say gently, as if speaking to a child. "We could get you a smartphone. It's really not that hard to learn." But I didn't want to learn. I didn't need to scroll through endless pictures of strangers' meals or read angry arguments between people who'd never met. My phone did what I needed it to do, and it kept Robert's voice alive. That was enough. The mockery escalated. At Emma's birthday party in September, Jessica made a whole spectacle of it in front of the other parents. "Look, everyone. Alice still uses a flip phone. I keep telling her she's living in the past, but she won't listen." The other parents laughed politely, uncomfortable, while I felt heat rise to my cheeks. Emma, my sweet 13-year-old granddaughter, looked away, embarrassed to be associated with me. I drove home that night with tears I refused to let fall until I was safely alone in my driveway. Inside my empty house, I sat at the kitchen table Robert had built with his own hands and asked the silence. When did loving something old become something to be ashamed of? But I swallowed my hurt, as I'd learned to do. I told myself that Jessica was young, that she didn't understand, that family was more important than pride. October brought cooler air and colder hearts. I noticed the whispered conversations that stopped when I entered a room. The way Jessica's eyes would flicker to David with some unspoken message. The way they'd begun asking me questions about my house, my finances, my plans for the future. "Mom, have you thought about downsizing?" David asked one evening, his voice too casual. "This house is a lot for one person. There are some nice senior communities nearby." "I'm not ready to leave my home," I said firmly. Your father and I built our life here. Jessica's jaw tightened. But it's just practical, Alice. You're not getting any younger. And this house is worth quite a bit. You could live somewhere simpler and have money well, for whatever you need. Whatever you need, she'd said. But her eyes said whatever we want. I saw it then, the greed creeping into the spaces where love should have been. My house, my savings, my life had become assets in their future plans. I was no longer David's mother or Emma and Noah's grandmother. I was becoming an inconvenience, an obstacle between them and comfort. But I said nothing. I smiled and changed the subject, because sometimes the best weapon is silence and observation. I'd learned that from 73 years of watching people show you who they really are, if you're patient enough to pay attention. The breaking point came on a Sunday in late October. They'd invited me for dinner, as usual. I baked my famous apple pie, the one David had loved since he was a boy, and drove over in my old sedan, my flip phone tucked safely in my cardigan pocket. I arrived 20 minutes early, something I rarely did, but I'd finished my pie early and thought perhaps I could help Jessica with the preparations. I used my key David had given me 1 year ago, and let myself in quietly, not wanting to startle anyone. The house was warm, smelling of roasting chicken, and I could hear voices coming from the kitchen. Jessica's voice, sharp and clear, stopped me in my tracks just outside the doorway. I'm serious, David. We need to do something about your mother. I can't keep pretending anymore. My heart stopped beating. My hand froze on my phone in my pocket. Jess, keep your voice down, David said. But he didn't sound angry. He sounded tired, resigned. Why? She's not here yet. Listen to me. She's becoming a burden. That house is sitting there worth at least $400,000, and she's just existing in it. Meanwhile, we're crammed in here, and Emma needs her own room, and we could actually have a life if what? David interrupted. If we put Mom in a home? There was a pause, a terrible, suffocating pause. Yes, Jessica said simply. There are perfectly nice assisted living facilities. She doesn't need that whole house. She barely leaves it anyway, and that ridiculous phone she carries around proves she's stuck in the past. It's time, David. We need to think about our family, as if I wasn't part of it anymore. My hands moved without conscious thought. I pulled out my old flip phone, opened it with the familiar soft click, and found the voice recorder function Robert had shown me years ago when I wanted to record Emma's first words. My fingers, trembling but steady enough, pressed record. And I stood there, outside my son's kitchen, and listened as they planned my life away. I don't know how long I stood there. Seconds, minutes, hours. Time became meaningless as their words carved themselves into my memory. Every sentence was a betrayal. Every agreement between them was another stone in the wall they were building around me, closing me off from the family I'd given everything to build. When I finally heard footsteps approaching the hallway, I slipped my phone back into my pocket, took a breath that hurt my chest, and quietly opened the front door again, this time making sure they heard me. Hello, I'm here, I called out, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my heart. They appeared in the hallway, all smiles and warm greetings. Jessica wiping her hands on a dish towel, David coming to kiss my cheek as if he hadn't just agreed to erase me from the home I loved. And as I smiled back at them, as I handed over my apple pie and complimented the smell of dinner, I felt my old flip phone resting against my heart like a shield. They thought I was too old to understand their game. They thought I was too naive to see through their kindness. But what they didn't know was that sometimes the smallest witness sees the biggest crimes. That dinner table had seen so many memories. Birthdays, holidays, laughter that made the walls feel alive. But that night, as I sat across from my son and his wife, watching them smile at me with mouths full of deception, I realized that sometimes the cruelest place on earth is a table where love has died, but everyone still pretends to pass the salt. Every bite of food tasted like betrayal. Every word they spoke felt like a performance I was forced to watch, knowing the terrible ending they'd already written for me. Welcome back, my dear. I'm so glad you stayed. This is Grandma Alice Stories, and I need you to understand something before we continue. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's as quiet as an old woman sitting at a dinner table, her flip phone recording in her pocket, while her family discusses her future like she's already gone. Stay close now. This is where the truth gets uncomfortable. I took my usual seat at the dining table, the one facing the kitchen where I could see Jessica moving back and forth, her smile bright and hollow as a jack-o'-lantern's. David poured me water, asked about my week, and for a moment, just a fleeting, painful moment, I wanted to believe I'd misheard everything. Maybe I was getting old. Maybe my ears had betrayed me. But then Jessica brought out the roasted chicken, set it down with a flourish, and said, "Alice, we're so glad you're here. We actually wanted to talk to you about something important tonight." My blood turned to ice water. "Oh," I said, my voice steady, my hands folded in my lap where they couldn't see them shaking. David cleared his throat, that nervous habit he'd had since he was a boy caught stealing cookies. "Mom, we've been thinking about your living situation." There it was, the conversation they'd rehearsed, probably multiple times, perfecting their concerned faces and gentle tones. "We worry about you," Jessica added, reaching across the table to pat my hand. Her touch felt like a snake's belly, cold and smooth. "That big house all by yourself. What if something happened? What if you fell and no one was there to help?" I looked at her perfectly manicured nails, her designer watch that cost more than my monthly grocery bill, and I thought, you don't worry about me falling. You worry about me living too long. "I'm managing just fine," I said quietly. "But are you?" David leaned forward, his face painted with false concern. "Mom, be honest. When was the last time you really enjoyed that house? You're always saying how much work the garden is, how the stairs are getting harder." I never said the stairs were getting harder. A flicker of something crossed his face. Annoyance. Maybe that I was disrupting their script. "Well, you're 73, Mom. It's natural for things to get more difficult. That's why we've been researching some really nice communities. Places where you'd have people around, activities, medical care right on site." "You mean nursing homes?" I said flatly. "Senior living communities," Jessica corrected, her voice dripping with false patience. "They're actually quite lovely. We visited a few, and honestly, Alice, you'd probably be much happier. No more worrying about maintenance. No more being alone all the time." "I'm not alone. I have my church friends. I have my garden. I have my memories." "Memories don't keep you company," Jessica said, and something sharp flashed in her eyes. "And let's be honest, holding on to the past isn't healthy. That phone of yours is a perfect example. You won't move forward." I felt my flip phone pressing against my ribs through my pocket, still recording every word. "What does my phone have to do with where I live?" "It's a symptom, Mom," David said, using that patronizing tone that made me feel like a child. "You're stuck, and we're worried that if something happened to you, we'd never forgive ourselves. You'd never forgive yourselves for missing out on my house money." I thought, but I didn't say it. Instead, I asked, "Where are Emma and Noah?" I thought we were having a family dinner. Another glance between them, quick as a serpent's tongue. "They're at their friends' houses," Jessica said smoothly. "We thought it would be better to have this conversation just us adults. So they'd planned this. They'd orchestrated an intervention, except I wasn't sick. I was inconvenient. I took a bite of chicken I didn't taste and watched them tag team their rehearsed arguments. David talked about safety and quality of life. Jessica mentioned the financial wisdom of selling while the market was good. They painted pictures of me in some sterile facility, playing bingo with strangers, pretending this was what I wanted. "And what would happen to my house?" I asked, already knowing the answer. They exchanged that look again, the one they thought I was too senile to interpret. Well, David said carefully, it would be sold, obviously, but the money would go toward your care, your new living situation. Anything left over would be saved for your future needs. Saved for my future needs. The lies tasted bitter in the air between us. And if I said no? Jessica's smile tightened. Alice, we're not trying to force you. We're just concerned. As your family, we have a responsibility to what? To decide my life for me? To ship me off so you can have what's mine. The mask slipped, just for a second. That's not fair, David said, his voice hardening. We're trying to help you, and you're acting like we're the enemy. Do you know how hard this is for us? How much time we've spent worrying about you? I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. Instead, I stood up slowly, my old bones creaking, and looked at my son. My baby boy who I'd rocked through nightmares, who I'd cheered for at every baseball game, who I'd loved with every fiber of my being. I need to use the restroom, I said quietly. In their bathroom, I locked the door and leaned against it, my whole body shaking. I pulled out my flip phone with trembling hands and stopped the recording. 43 minutes. I had 43 minutes of them planning my removal from my own life. Their voices clear and damningly honest in that kitchen before I'd arrived. And now this dinner conversation full of veiled threats and false concern. I looked at myself in the mirror, an old woman with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much. But those eyes weren't defeated. They were calculating. I saved the recording, made a copy, and sent it to my email, the one thing I had figured out on this outdated phone. Then I splashed cold water on my face, straightened my cardigan, and went back to face my wolves in sheep's clothing. When I returned, they'd already cleared my plate. We didn't know how long you'd be, Jessica said, not quite meeting my eyes. We have dessert, though. Your apple pie. I sat back down and watched David cut slices, his hands steady, his conscience apparently undisturbed. I've been thinking about what you said. I began, and they both perked up like vultures spotting fresh prey. About my living situation. Yes. David leaned forward eagerly. I think you're right. I should make some changes. Jessica's smile could have lit up the whole street. Oh, Alice, I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this. We really do have your best interests at heart. I'm sure you do, I said softly. I'd like to see the information about these communities. And I should probably talk to my lawyer too, about my will and the house and making sure everything is in order. Of course, David said quickly. We can help you with all of that. We'll set up appointments, go with you. That won't be necessary. I'm old, not incompetent. Another flash of something in Jessica's eyes. Frustration. Maybe that I wasn't as easy to manipulate as they'd hoped. We just want to support you, she said. I know exactly what you want, I replied, my voice gentle but my meaning sharp as broken glass. The rest of the evening passed in awkward small talk. I ate my pie and complimented the dinner. I kissed David's cheek when I left. I thanked them both for their concern. And all the while, my flip phone sat in my pocket like a loaded gun, waiting for the right moment to fire. I drove home through streets blurred with tears I finally allowed to fall. In my driveway, I sat in the darkness for a long time, my hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only solid thing left in my world. My son wanted to erase me. His wife wanted to profit from my absence. And my grandchildren, my sweet Emma and Noah, were being raised by people who saw family as a transaction. But I wasn't done yet. Inside my house, I made myself tea with hands that had stopped shaking and opened my laptop. Yes, I had a laptop. I wasn't as helpless as they thought. I listened to the recording again, every word a knife wound, and I began to plan. They thought my old phone was a joke. They thought I was a relic to be boxed up and stored away. What they didn't know was that this relic still had teeth, and I was about to bite back. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I've learned that truth is even more powerful when it's served at room temperature. in the middle of a family gathering, where everyone can taste its bitterness at once. I spent a week planning what would become the most important dinner I'd ever host. Not because of the food, but because of what I was about to serve alongside it. Sometimes, my dear, the only way to cure poison is to make people swallow their own medicine. Welcome back, my dear friend. This is Grandma Alice Stories, and if you've stayed with me this far, you know we're heading toward the moment when silence becomes thunder. Pour that tea a little stronger today, you're going to need it. What you're about to hear is what happens when an outdated woman refuses to be deleted from her own story. The Monday after that terrible dinner, I called my lawyer, Martin Brenner. A good man who'd handled Robert's estate and had known our family for 30 years. I sat in his office with my flip phone on his mahogany desk between us, and I played him the recording. I watched his face change as he listened. First confusion, then disbelief, then a cold, professional anger that told me everything I needed to know. "Alice," he said when the recording ended, his voice grave. "This is elder abuse, financial exploitation. We could pursue criminal charges if you wanted." But I shook my head. "I don't want them in jail, Martin. I want them to understand what they've done. I want them to feel it." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "What do you need from me?" "I need my will changed. Today. And I need you to come to dinner at my house this Sunday as a witness." Over the next few days, I made my preparations with the careful precision of a woman who'd been underestimated her entire life. I called David and told him I wanted to host Sunday dinner at my house, that I had important news to share about my decision regarding my living arrangements. "That's great, Mom," he'd said, his voice bright with barely concealed greed. "We'll all be there. This is really the right choice." I could hear Jessica in the background. "Tell her we're proud of her." Proud. The word sat in my stomach like a stone. I invited my church friends too, Margaret, Helen, and Dorothy, women who'd known me for decades, who'd held my hand at Robert's funeral, who knew what real family looked like. "Just come for dessert around 7, I told them. "I need witnesses to something." "Witnesses?" Margaret's voice was sharp with concern. "Alice, what's going on?" "You'll see, dear. You'll see." Sunday arrived with autumn rain tapping against my windows like impatient fingers. I cooked all afternoon, pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, fresh rolls, and another apple pie. My last supper with my son, I thought, though he didn't know it yet. David's family arrived at 5:30, all smiles and false warmth. Jessica had dressed up, as if this were a celebration. Emma and Noah hugged me, and my heart broke a little more because they had no idea what their parents had planned for me. "Something smells amazing, Mom," David said, hanging his coat. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble." "It's no trouble at all," I said sweetly. "After all, this is a special occasion." We sat down to dinner, and the conversation flowed like poisoned honey. Jessica talked about the senior communities they'd researched, painting pictures of my new life, with activities and friends and freedom from responsibility. David chimed in with financial details, how much my house could sell for, how comfortable I'd be with the proceeds. "We've even picked out a nice place, Grandma," Emma said, trying to be helpful. "It has a pool and everything." My granddaughter being used as a prop in her parents' scheme. That hurt most of all. "That sounds lovely, dear," I said, passing the potatoes. At 7 o'clock sharp, my doorbell rang. David frowned. "Are you expecting someone?" "Yes," I said, standing. "My friends from church. And my lawyer." The air in the room changed instantly. I watched Jessica's face drain of color, watched David's eyes widen. "Your lawyer?" "Mom, what?" But I was already at the door, welcoming Margaret, Helen, Dorothy, and Martin inside. They came in with the autumn rain on their coats, and suddenly my dining room felt very crowded, very tense. "What's going on?" David stood, his voice tight. "Sit down, son," I said quietly. "All of you. It's time we had an honest conversation." Jessica gripped the edge of the table. Alice, if this is about... It's about the truth, I interrupted. Emma, Noah, I need you to go upstairs to my sewing room for a little while. The adults need to talk. But Grandma, Noah started. Now, sweetheart, please. Something in my voice made them obey. I watched them climb the stairs, and then I turned back to face my son and his wife, with my friends and my lawyer standing witness behind me. I pulled out my flip phone, that mocked, outdated, embarrassing flip phone, and set it on the table. Do you know what this is? I asked softly. Mom, please, David said, his voice pleading now. We can talk about this privately. No, we're going to talk about it right here, right now, in front of witnesses. I looked at Martin. Because what I'm about to play is evidence of attempted elder abuse and financial exploitation. Jessica shot to her feet. That's ridiculous. We've done nothing but try to help. Sit down and listen, I said, my voice like iron wrapped in velvet. I pressed play. My small dining room filled with their voices from that kitchen conversation I'd recorded. Jessica's sharp complaints about me being a burden, David's tired agreement, their calculations about my house's worth, their cold, clinical discussion of putting me away so they could have my assets. Every damning word played out while they sat frozen, their faces growing paler, their mouths opening and closing like fish drowning in air. When the recording reached Jessica saying, "We need to think about our family," as if I wasn't part of it, I saw Margaret wipe tears from her eyes. Then I played the dinner conversation from the following week. Their fake concern, their rehearsed manipulation, their veiled threats disguised as care. When it ended, the silence was deafening. Mom, David's voice cracked. I can explain. Explain what? I asked. Explain how you planned to remove me from my home? Explain how you saw me as an obstacle to your comfort. Explain how you raised your children to think it's acceptable to discard people when they become inconvenient. We never meant, Jessica started. You meant exactly what you said. I cut her off. You thought I was too old, too stupid, too stuck in the past to notice. You mocked my phone, my lifestyle, my choices because it made it easier to see me as less than human, as something to be managed and moved and profited from. Dorothy spoke up, her voice shaking with anger. I've known Alice for 25 years. She raised you, David, while working 2 jobs after your father got sick. She paid for your college. She babysat your children for free every week for years. And this is how you repay her. David couldn't meet her eyes. Or mine. I've changed my will, I said quietly. Martin witnessed it yesterday. This house, my savings, everything, it's going to charity. To organizations that protect elders from exactly what you tried to do to me. You can't, Jessica gasped. I can. I did. And it's done. I looked at my son, really looked at him, searching for the boy I'd raised somewhere behind those guilty eyes. I loved you more than my own life, David. I would have given you anything if you'd just asked, if you'd just been honest. But you chose deception. You chose greed. And now you've lost something you can never get back. Mom, please, he whispered. We made a mistake. We were wrong. But we're still family. Family? I repeated the word like it was foreign on my tongue. Family doesn't plot to erase you. Family doesn't mock what you love. Family doesn't measure your worth by what they can inherit when you're gone. I stood and walked to the door, opening it. Rain poured into the night beyond. I think it's time for you to leave, I said. Jessica grabbed her purse. Her face twisted with rage and humiliation. You'll regret this. You'll end up alone. And don't come crying to us. I'd rather be alone with my dignity than surrounded by people who see me as currency, I said. David stood slowly, his face stricken. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know you are, I said softly. You're sorry you got caught. I watched them leave. My son, his wife, and after I called them down, my confused grandchildren who couldn't understand why we were leaving Grandma's house in such a hurry, why their parents looked so angry and ashamed. When the door closed behind them, I turned to face my friends and my lawyer. Margaret immediately wrapped me in her arms. "Oh, Alice," she whispered. "You're so brave." But I didn't feel brave. I felt broken and relieved all at once, like a bone that had been set wrong for years and finally snapped back into proper place. It hurt, but it was a healing kind of pain. That night, after everyone left and I was alone in my quiet house, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and my old flip phone. I scrolled through the pictures stored in its simple memory. Robert's smile, Emma's first day of school, Noah's gap-toothed grin, David as a boy with dirt on his face and joy in his eyes. The phone they'd mocked had saved me. The outdated ways they'd scorned had revealed the truth they'd tried to hide. I opened Robert's last voicemail and listened to his voice. "Alice, don't forget, you're stronger than you know. I love you forever." And I realized something sitting there in the darkness. Being alone isn't the same as being abandoned. Sometimes the people who leave are the ones who were never truly there to begin with. And sometimes the oldest tools, like truth, like self-respect, like a flip phone that still works when everything else is falling apart, are the ones that matter most. I was 73 years old, and I just lost my family. But I'd found myself again. And that, my dear, is worth more than all the smartphones in the world. Remember, what goes around doesn't just come around, it comes home. And the truth always rings louder than the latest ringtone. Thank you for staying with me through this story, dear friend. If Grandma Alice's tale touched your heart, reminded you to value what's real over what's new, or showed you that wisdom never goes out of style, then please subscribe to Grandma Alice Stories. Hit that notification bell, because every week I share stories about family, betrayal, karma, and the lessons life teaches us when we're brave enough to listen. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they're never too old to stand up for themselves. And remember, every story here carries a lesson, and every voice here matters. Even the voice coming from an old flip phone. Until next time, keep your heart wise and your truth close. This is Grandma Alice, reminding you that love shouldn't require you to lose yourself. God bless you, dear.